Okay guys, welcome back here. We're going to do a little demo today and we're going to talk about working in two-point perspective. I'm going to cover a couple of basics for you really quick and tell you some do's and don'ts, and I'm also going to talk to you about using a measuring line in two-point perspective. Okay? And if you're really nice, I'll show you a little secret that I've showed a couple of you guys before on how to do drawings more efficiently. Okay, so let's start with what we know in two-point perspective. And here's one of the things is that whenever I talk with students, they're like, oh yeah, I've already had a perspective class. And I'm like, okay, but can you apply it and can you draw out of your head and make it work? Actually, let me back up there. Let's do a couple layers here. This one's going to be our base, so I don't have to draw it 4 times. So let's start with what we have. Whoa, let's do that again. There we go. Now I hold shift and it works. Okay, so we have our horizon line. Okay, so the thing about two-point perspective is that we always have vanishing point 1, and you always want to label it, and we have vanishing point 2 over to the side here. Okay, I'm going to come off of this right now, and I'm going to draw a grid really quick. And anything that you do, you always want to have this grid. The grid is there because it allows your eyeballs to see what's happening and to get a feel for depth. Even if I'm out freehand sketching in my sketchbook, or if I'm out at the zoo, I'm sketching animals, or I'm at a park sketching kids, playing, dogs, doing whatever, I'm always drawing grids because it gives me a better understanding of how things are happening. Okay? Sorry, I should have brought my longer ruler. There. So there's my base grid that I have. Okay? And everyone in this class can do that right now. That's a pretty easy and our base mandatory starting point. Okay? Now, where students tend to make a mistake is that, and it's not your fault, because there's not a lot of good instruction out there on how to start drawing in this. So what most people do in most books, so for example, I'm going to show you a couple things really quick here. If I go back online, and if I go to, let's go to Google, and I'm going to do a search. There's a wonderful book that was created by Andrew Loomis. Okay, let's try that again. So if I come over here and I type in creative illustration by Andrew Loomis, okay, he created this book, and actually if you look, you can actually sometimes find the PDF online for free. Let's see if we found it here. And it's loading. Yeah, we did find it. Most of it's up here. So in this book, he talks a lot about designing. There it is. So you could go find this and actually download it, because this is a book from back in the 50s. And this book covers a lot of basics about drawing and perspective and how things work. Okay? Hold on a minute. Scrolling down the perspective page. He talks about the importance of line, formal design, patterning, and then what happens is he starts to talk about perspective. Hold on, I'm getting there. There we go. So,
who is this artist?
This is Andrew Loomis.
Loomis. Oh.
And so you can look at this book is called Creative Illustration by Andrew Loomis. And what happened is after he passed, his estate made this available as a PDF because I think they were pissed off at the deal they had with the publisher. So the publisher wasn't giving them enough money. They're like, fine, I'm going to put the PDF online for free. I can do whatever I want with it.
They stopped publishing books too.
Yeah, and I think they start publishing the book, but now you can find it in PDF form. This is great because this is what we're going to talk about today, this little section right here. Instead of copying and pasting this page out, which I could have done, I just wanted to show it to you guys, so if you want to download this, have it in your little arsenal of PDFs and look at it, it's really fantastic, okay? So this is key right here. What a lot of artists don't understand is they end up putting the vanishing points too close together, okay, and too close to the frame. Andrew Loomis has drawing experience, so you see where his frame is now? You see the relationship to the vanishing points to that frame, okay? Come back to that in just a second. So what most students do when they start off in 2-point perspective, okay, why is that not working? Well, that's not good. We have a lock up here. There we go. Okay. Is they come over, and I've been teaching this class long enough to see it happen every single semester. And somebody in this class is going to do this when they come back next week, and then I'm going to, not to be rude, but I'm going to pick on them a little bit and go, did you not listen to the last lecture? Because a lot of students don't. So, students come in now and they start drawing. And the problem with that is that anything that I draw on here has a lot of convergence happening. And why does it have so much convergence? Because vanishing points are too close together. And then the subject matter, which are the buildings, are too large. That is the most common student mistake that happens every time I teach this class. All the years, going back and forth. It happened at Laguna. It happened online at CGMA. It even happened in the same classroom. No matter how many times I cover this, somebody will come back and they will put their vanishing points at the end of the picture frame. Do not do that. That's not a good idea. This creates what I call the fan effect, which is like a fan radiating like this. Because of that fan effect, you end up having all your work be symmetrical. Because you are creating subject matter that is too large, and then you end up centering it so you don't get it in that fan effect. And then anything drawn outside of the fan on this side is out of the cone of vision and looks distorted. So you end up drawing and placing everything in the center right here. That's not the approach that we want to do. What we want to do is we want to go back. Let's take a quick little look. That's what we want to do. That's going to be huge for us. Okay? The problem is most of you guys don't know how to figure out how to get this angle. So what's funny is when you go look at a lot of perspective books, they show you people drawing at, all the examples of 2-point perspective have the vanishing point super close. And as soon as I see that book, I go, piece of crap, and I toss it because they don't know what they're talking about. Okay? So this is how you want to start, is you want to come in here and you want to have a frame and have your vanishing points outside of that frame. Okay? So watch. I'm going to just draw a really quick frame here. And let's say, oops, I'm on blue still. Let's say I decide to frame up and have my frame about right here. Okay, that's perfect for a couple reasons. Okay? Number one, I don't have as much as the fan effect happening because my vanishing points are further out. Okay? Number two, I now have the ability to do this. I have the ability to reframe and move my frame around to develop the best composition in my particular piece. So a lot of times I'll look at your guys' work and I'll make a comment, that looks good, but reframe and pull out. So if I say pull out 2 inches, I can still do that right now, right? If your vanishing points are on the end of your frame, like so, where am I able to move my frame? Nowhere. Can't move it. Means I can't reframe and I can't work. I'm locked in here. So if my frame is smaller, like so, I have this wonderful ability to move around. Okay? So this is going to lead us to now what is called a measuring line. Some of you, if you don't have a larger piece of paper where you can have your vanishing points on the paper, there's 2 options here. You could take another piece of paper and tape it and draw the horizon line, and then you have another vanishing point out here, but then you need a super duper long ruler to get it to work, right? Some of you have the smaller ruler. There's nothing wrong with that. I did that for years while working at a studio. if you go, our bookstore doesn't have it, but I love these rulers. They sell this ruler in a version that's like that long. And it's great. I have them at home. Okay? So some of you have the more compact version of this, which is like this big. I think it's like 11 inches long, and it's like cut off, only an inch thick. That's fine. Problem is how do you get out to that vanishing point when you're constantly doing this with your ruler? You're going from one vanishing point to the other to make sure your squares and your buildings are accurate. Well, that gets to be really hard. So here's a little secret that you can do is we create a measuring line on the side like this. I take that measuring line, and then I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to come off of my vanishing point, and as I move my ruler, I'm going to make a little notch on there. And that little notch is giving me a visual indication of the angle of the line and what's happening. Okay? So I'm going to label that. That's your ML. And this is a great way to draw. And actually, watch, I could even sort of do it out of my head. I know that angle is going to go to about there. There's a line there. It's going to go about there. It's going to go about there. And now I could even check it. I was a little off on this one. It's a little bit more like that. All you got to do is make about 4 marks going in both directions. And the great reason for doing that is now when I'm working, if my vanishing point isn't accessible to me, whenever I draw a line here of a building, so if I'm going to draw a building hitting the ground right here, tell you what happened there. I just draw that line over and make sure that line is at the right angle mark, right? Does that make sense? Okay. How I know my line is incorrect is if I do this, that's not fitting between these 2 marks, is it? No, it's that simple. So by doing this, I don't have to worry about always having that other vanishing point or finding it if it's really far. I now have a little measuring line with a couple indications on it. I could come over and anything that I draw, I just match up to those little lines. And I could do that on both sides if I want, really quickly. So that step 1 is part of, preparing. So what I'm going to do, this isn't part of you should make this part of your notes. In fact, I'll find a section to add it in there. So let's just call this preparing a drawing in 2-point perspective. Okay? So step number 1 is placing vanishing points outside of box to avoid fan effect. Step number 2 is to draw smaller subject matter. Okay. Step number 3 is then to create a measuring line to help assist with vanishing points outside or off page. Okay? That right there is the golden way to start your work. Okay? If I go to, now that I told you about that, so if I go look up 2-point perspective, what's the problem?
Too close.
Vanishing points are inside the frame. The subject matter is too large. It's going to look like crap. What's the problem?
That's terrible.
Yeah, it's totally terrible. This is why most high school art teachers suck. Sorry to say that, but they just don't have any training. Okay? So, what's the problem? Vanishing points are inside the picture frame now. Even worse. Subject matter is way too large. Doesn't work. Why is that working?
Because the vanishing points are so big.
Exactly, the vanishing points are much further out, okay? Notice the symmetry that happens. Why? Vanishing points are still a little close. This one ends right here. This one ends right here. So what happens whenever you have your vanishing point super close to the frame is you're going to automatically start to center and have symmetry happening. Why? You don't know, you don't even realize you're doing it. You're finding the most comfortable space to draw, which is inside the cone of vision, which is inside the middle of the picture plane. That's why you're doing that. And most artists don't even know that they're doing it. So they come in here and see the fan effect. Everything's converging. Vanishing point, too close. So you end up drawing the subject matter too large. And so this is my argument with most of the perspective books that are out there, is they teach this type of nonsense to students that this is how you should learn how to draw. And it's totally inaccurate. Having that slight understanding of where to place, start to get like a weird fisheye view there, okay? Now, I know some of you probably have this question for me, like, Phil, can I have a vanishing point inside the picture plane and one outside? The answer is yes. I know where you're going. Yeah. I've been there before, been down this road. The answer is yes. You can create a really cool effect by doing that. So you can have one vanishing point right on the edge of the frame and then have one further out. That looks great. You get some really cool angles from doing that. Okay, so I'm going to draw that for you in just a second. I wanted to show you a couple samples here. So you'll see somebody's how to draw backgrounds. So someone's copying the Star Wars style and maybe looking at Feng Zhu here. What's the problem? Vanishing points are inside the picture frame. Okay? So if I go look at all this work, all these people trying to draw stuff, you're going to be the line right down the middle. It's like it's always common because that's the happy place. You're in the cone of vision right there. People always put a line down the middle. It happens every single time. It's because you have that fan effect that's happening. So I could go look at like 20 different drawings, and there's always a freaking line in the middle. It never changes. Okay? It's always the same. Okay? So I gave you guys a little secret right there. Okay? Look. It's never ending, right? You look at it, it's just always, it's like I spent hours on the buildings. Actually that's not a bad shot, but the vanishing points are still a little close. It makes it too complicated. Okay? And you get something like that. They're like, hey, I'm going to get tricky here and draw my building to the right side. And they're like, now you just distorted your building because it's no longer at a 90. So when you look at that, the vanishing points are too close. The subject matter is so large that this is not a 90. You see that, right? So to be accurate, because we covered this today, that 90 should be going at more of an angle like this, which would make the other vanishing point way out back down here. Okay? So that's a perfect example right there of what happens when your subject matter is way too large. Okay? And there's just so many examples. It's unfortunately, there's lots of crappy art books out there. Okay, so now that we did this, I of course I drew this all in the frame layer, which is fine. So let me do this. A little secret that I've taught before, and when I teach the digital drawing class, Dart 107, we cover some topics like this. Michael's going to teach that class, by the way, next semester. What, Kelsey?
I didn't get the rest of the notes that you had.
Okay, I'll go back and turn it on. There you go. Write them down real quick. Okay, so Michael Matsumoto is going to teach that class, that digital drawing class next semester. That way, if you haven't had it, he'll be covering a lot of things with perspective in here, not as much detail, but then you're going to get to draw props and ships and other stuff like that. So it's a great way to draw, but you're getting to practice drawing digitally instead of working traditionally. Okay. All right. So Kelsey, you got the notes there?
Yeah.
Ready? Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn that off. And a little secret that I've done before, and I've told students to do this, is that if your vanishing points are really far out from each other, what you can do is you can take a piece of the grid and then enlarge it and draw off of the grid, and then put the measuring lines on the sign. And this is how you would do that, though. So I don't have enough. The secret to this, though, is you need more lines in between, and I'll explain why. So right now I'm going to come over here. Let's go back down to this grid. I'm not trying to make it really busy, but you'll see the method behind the madness in this here. I'm going to draw more lines in here for my grid. I'm going to make it a little busier. Pen keeps slipping. Did it again. I'm going to come back the other way and do this. So see how busy my grid's starting to look? So this is actually a little draftsman's secret on how we learn to draw props very quickly and other items, okay? So now I have a pretty busy grid there, right? That I eyeballed. So here's a great little secret for you on how you can work. Is that I'm going to come in here now. I'm going to take my marquee tool in Photoshop. And I'm going to select that right there. I'm going to hit copy. I'm going to turn this off. I'm going to paste this onto another layer. Let's try that again. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and come back and I'm going to put a frame on that. So here's a little golden secret on how people learn to draw props and mechs and stuff like that. Is what I just did is I took an accurate grid and perspective and I just blew it up. So I'm much more closed inside the grid. I still have 2-point going, but by doing this now, where are my vanishing points? Way, way, way off the page at a huge angle. So what's cool about doing this is now I can come in here and I can create my measuring line. Oops, sorry, that was a little crooked. The ruler slipped, there we go. I hold shift. And now I could come off of my grid and just put the markers in there. Just taking my ruler and I'm lining up with the lines that I already have. There we go. That's my horizon line. So do you see how I did that really quick? Then I could come in here and I can drop the opacity down on this if I want. I could print that out and then I could draw on top of it. So I just saved myself a ton of time by doing that. So that's why sometimes when people draw like mechs and stuff and robots, you'll see they'll have this illusion. I need to go on another layer, sorry. They'll have this illusion that the lines are parallel to each other. They're not actually parallel. They're just zoomed in on a grid so much that they look like they're parallel, but there's a light convergence happening. But if I come in here and if I start drawing a spaceship, and if I start with the center line first, so we'll cover this in the weeks to come. This is an approach to drawing where you start with the center line. By understanding that center line and understanding the midpoints, I can then create ships off of this approach. Oops. So if I start sketching in this, let me just rough something out really quick. You see how fast I can start to sketch some type of vehicle or ship or element? We'll cover that next. There's two drawing methods. One's working from a center line in a box. The other one's working in what we call additive and subtractive shape. So what's cool about this is I could basically come in here and start sketching up and having this whole idea of what my ship might look like. Okay? So there, I can just rough up a quick little vehicle or ship if I wanted to. That's using that sort of that method. Let me see how far I can go back here. Sorry, the video recorder is really slowing down how Photoshop works. And of course, I drew this on the grid. Let me see how far I can go back. So this is a great little approach, being able to enlarge the grid like this, because now I can work off of this and I can do it very quickly. So let's see how little bit more. Come on, keep going. Go. Cool. What's great about this is now your job is to come up with a city, okay, with a warehouse in it / factory and the view. So now you come in here and, oh wait, it's still going. See, my hands aren't even touching it. Hold on, it's still going. This is what happens when it's recording. It's eating up all the RAM and the computer. So step forward. See how much I lost. Come on, I don't want to have to redraw it all.
Now you just use the hotkeys.
Because I don't know what the arrow is, and it never works as a hotkey.
Oh.
Every time I hit the arrow and do that, it never ever works. Okay, we'll get started from here. So what's cool about this now? Wait, hold on. I'm gonna skip the whole. So you don't have to do that approach to zoom in. That's just an option that you can do. But what's important is that if I draw in here, we talked about where the vanishing points are. If I draw and I decide to come in here and frame about like right here, then I can use this. I can then drop this down. Obviously, I want the grid to be much lighter, not that heavy. It's too hard to see. And then on a layer above this, I can start sketching in buildings. I can start saying like, hey, I'm going to have a building that's going to be sort of like right here. And then I might come over here. I might have a street that goes this way and turns this way. I can have another building that's over here. And then I can have, get my ruler real quick. And then I could come over here. So now I'm not even looking at the vanishing points. I'm just going off of the trace lines that are already on the grid. That might be my rough factory. And then back here I might have a bunch of houses, another street or two. And I might have some smaller houses. Because nothing's better than putting a giant factory right in the middle of a residential neighborhood. Right? It's actually true. Do you guys know what sriracha sauce is?
Yeah.
I love that stuff. Did you see they put it right in Irwindale? And it was like right next to a residential neighborhood. And so all this red fumes were like coming out of the plant. And all the neighbors were like, oh, my dog's like crying 24/7. And it was true. I mean, it wasn't working. So they got pissed and they moved the whole factory to Texas. Because in Texas, you can just burn coal and whatever you want. Nobody cares, So they moved the whole plant to Texas, which is a shame. And I believe it's the guy that owns it is Chinese, a Chinese recipe, right? Ancient, like family recipe, the sriracha sauce that he's had that's come down all this lineage. And he knows, I mean, it's just delicious stuff. So anyway, this is how nothing is better than having a turkey burger with sriracha sauce on it.
What's sriracha?
It's that Chinese red sauce we're talking about. Okay, has nothing to do with perspective. Anyway,
That sounds good.
so look, that's my roughing right there. That's how I start to work. I don't have any symmetrical lines coming down now. I'm avoiding all of those drawing problems because of the position of my vanishing points, okay? That's how I want you guys to get started. And I want you to start creating thumbnails of thinking about an exterior view of your warehouse / factory with other houses or buildings or whatever around it, okay? But this is all you need to do is just boxes like this. Because you're going to do a bunch of passes. You're going to be like, yeah, I don't like that. I do like this, and then we'll go from there. And part of the other demo that I did touches into this where I get in a lot more detail, okay? So now let's just say you're working traditionally and you don't have Photoshop where you can do like some of the things that I just did. That's totally fine. I do this all the time in my sketchbook, but I want you to think smart. So let's say I'm starting with my horizon line right here. Okay. Let's say you decide to pick a vanishing point that's here, and let me put a frame up above. Let's say you decide to frame. I want you to try some examples. Try doing a drawing like this, a rough thumbnail. Now I'm drawing it larger so you guys can all see. Okay. Try doing a thumbnail like this, but now this other vanishing point put way, way out off the page. So you can have one be closer like so. Ooh, wrong. There we go, wrong layer. Throw your grid in real lightly. Okay. Now, my other vanishing point's going to be really far out. So since I can't find it, I'm going to draw a measuring line real quick here. I'm going to come out and pretend I know exactly where it is. It's like way off the page here. And I'm just going to draw a couple lines. One marker, second marker, third, maybe a fourth. That's it. Same thing, I'm going to go up, holding my ruler and looking at where the point would be. I'm going to put a little bit upward here, here, there, and there. Okay? Now that those lines are done, I'm just going to match those lines into my grid. And obviously, the closer you get to your horizon line, the more that line starts to level off. That makes sense? Because once it gets to the horizon line, it's going to be straight across. All right, now, that's it. I have my grid. So I have one VP right here. I have a second vanishing point way off the page somewhere. So there's no reason why you can't start thumbnailing like that. And then we start with boxes. Do we draw detail? No. Do we draw shading? No. We start with simple boxes. And we remember the application of foreground, midground, and background still applies. So if I decide to come in and say, hey, you know, I really like, actually, let me lower the opacity of this down a little bit because I know it gets a little overwhelming. I can draw on this. Actually, I'm going to be smart. That's my frame. So I always like to give you guys that option of reframing. There. So now I have a layer on here. I'm going to start to sketch. So I might come in here and be like, you know, hey, I'm going to have a street that goes this way. Maybe it ends here. Maybe there's a little sidewalk on the street. And I'm going to have a building up here on the corner. So my other vanishing point, I'm going to go off that line right there. There's the top of my building. We see that. There's my building. That's the foreground. And then you just map it out. So anything in this general area in here is going to be sort of like your foreground, right? And then you know where the midground is, you know where the background is. So it's a little different. It's not quite, it's the same as one point, but now we have two different angles to apply it. So we need to think about how we put these together. So maybe there's a roof here, okay? And then I might come over here, might decide to put another street going like this way. Then I might put a couple more buildings over here. Maybe make this guy a little bit taller. I can get to that other vanishing point, which is fine. And you just block in from here. Maybe there's a fence, right? I can rough in like a little fence. Maybe this guy has a tree in his yard. So there's a tree, just roughed out. Then I'm going to come over and start working on stuff in the midground. Then I might be like, oh, you know what? I want my factory. I have a giant polluting factory. And so I'm going to have it right in the middle of this residential because it'll be funny. Don't get caught in the story and overdone. You just keep it simple. Now remember, let's talk a little bit about design principles here, right? If my factory is a box, is it going to be interesting and appealing? No. The golden rule is that the larger the silhouette around my factory, the more interesting my design will be. Supposed to be like another smokestack. You know, maybe, I don't know, maybe this has a little. Factories have all kinds of crap coming off of them. You have to look at the details and see what they might be. So I'm just adding, wherever I have a straight line or a 90, I want to throw something in there that breaks it. So there I have a 90 that hits here. So I'm thinking maybe there's a little corner that, you know, jets out like this, and then maybe I have a couple lines that go this way. What's the one thing I haven't really done in this drawing yet? I sort of did it with the fence and the tree. I haven't set scale. So if I come over here and do this,
Wow.
my factory is not that big anymore.
It's hardly
Okay.
a factory at all.
It's not a factory. But if I put doors on the side for a semi-truck, look like that, I just set some scale to it, right? So that might be the little loading dock where the sriracha sauce is picked up. Okay, so what I've established now in this sketch right here is foreground, midground. I haven't done any background yet. So what could background be? Well, there's all kinds of background. I could come in here, I could have some houses in the back. So I might come off of VP1, draw another street back here, a little sidewalk, and then I might sketch some smaller scale. Sorry, I'm getting a massive lag now from the video recorder. It's like a 2-second lag on everything I draw. So I don't get to see the line till like 2 seconds later. Might be another tree, a little fence, and then there might be another house. Starting this way, maybe his roof goes the opposite way. Maybe he's got a tree behind, whatever. So I start to make the indication of like a little neighborhood in the back. Maybe I decide to be like, oh, look, they're living in Utah. It's got little mountains, right? So you fill up the drawing, fill up the sketch, keep going. So on that note, there is a point in time where you're going to have to go back to Google or Pinterest. You're going to have to type in exterior warehouse or factory and look up. Now, that's not a good one to follow there, right? Because it's boring from a design standpoint. That looks like the sketch warehouse almost. That's pretty cool. Look at how this one pops up. I know it's a little blurry. Look at how tall that is. Right there. Look at how these little angles come off the side of it, right? You can add the little elements. You can have fun with it. And there's a certain, look at that. That looks cool. Because it's older. That has like metal. Look at the windows up on the top. See, I can incorporate those differences from looking at reference into my drawing now. Okay? So, unfortunately, sometimes I always look for something like, look at those shapes. I don't even know what those are, but those are sort of cool.
Oh, that's where I was 13. That was the TV show.
Oh, okay. Did not know that. Let's type in factory. This is where warehouses and factories are somewhat similar. Similar in boxy shape. But then if you look around and start gathering some cool reference, look at that. So gorgeous. Big round tube shapes and all that stuff. Right? So what I can do, look at the arches here. See that? The windows, oval windows. That stuff I can start incorporating into part of my drawing. So I can look at reference and then I could be like, okay, maybe in the back of the factory here. Hold on, I got a lag to get back to Photoshop. There we go. I can put maybe there's a wall that goes back this way, another pillar in here, and then I maybe have like all those like tube-like items and stuff. Maybe that's all more of the factory in the back here. Don't draw too many ellipses if you don't know what you're doing. Okay, there. So I just start to rough it in. We got to be careful. Too many of those could make it look like it's a city, right? That's one thumbnail right there. Boom. Doesn't need to be anything more than that. I mean, I might come in here and I could be like, oh, hey, I want to put I might have a yield sign, something in the foreground, establish more scale. When I just looked at that one factory, right, I might decide, hey, what if I increase this size here? Maybe there's another little cornice. Maybe there's a front entry around thing with pillars. And then like large windows and then a small door type of thing. I could have a sign on the front of this. You guys need to design it. You need to think about it. But before we get to that, we're starting with basic shapes, right? And the basic principles. So some of you have never even drawn something really in 2-point. So we covered all those points today, right? So the next lecture I'll probably give will be similar to the lecture that's already up there, where I'm going to start drawing on top of a couple of your sketches and your drawings and talking more about what to do and not to do in terms of a design standpoint. But your job now is to apply it, to take the rules of 2-point, to start to apply it into an environment and find out how it works. And by doing that, you're going to be doing a couple things. Number one, you're going to be moving your vanishing points around. You're going to be adjusting a frame, and then you're going to be moving your horizon line up and down and coming up with different effects, okay? If you decided to do a drawing where you're up high and there's a kid sitting on a roof looking down at a factory, you could pull something like that off, but I don't want you to get caught up. I don't want you to draw the kid. You could tell me where the kid would be, but then I don't want you getting caught up and off track in the character design and doing something totally else. Stick with the basics.
Drawing
Yeah.
the silhouette of
Huh?
the kid? Like a
I don't even want you
silhouette.
to do that, because then next thing you know, people will be like, oh yeah, it's the boy and the creature and he's got a backpack and there's a whole story around it, and they're totally off page. Your goal is to figure out how to craft and carve something in 2-point perspective and to come up with various thumbnails, right? So I've given you all the steps that you need to do to get there, and the most important steps are the vanishing points. Now you get to have fun. So what's cool about this is I did do this, guys. Kept my frame separate. The reason why I did that is whenever I draw, I come in all the time and I go, I like that angle better. Or maybe, you know what, I like that angle with the horizon line lower, but I want to make my frame go a little bit taller so I can see the sky a little bit more like that. So now I'm still getting foreground elements. This is the benefit of you having tracing paper, is being able to reframe or move over part of your drawing and to make these adjustments, okay? FYI, real quick, the most common tendency that students tend to do is they leave the sky
Open.
completely open and empty, okay? So I'm going to show you a little trick here. Your sky is a plane, and it does exist in perspective. So if I come back to my vanishing points right now. So the same grid that exists going downward in your world still exists upward in your world. I'm going to just draw a really fast grid here and talk about a couple things. Okay. This is probably the other second most common thing that students tend to forget. Right now I'm just angling, going off of my measuring line there, right? Let me get a line in the middle there. There we go. Something like that, okay? I drew that separate because you got to be careful. You don't want the lines to be too overdone, okay, on your sky plane. And this is why sky planes are important, is that if I come and draw on top of that, most cloud structures that you're looking up at and or trees, you can see underneath. So if I had a foreground element here and let's say I had a huge tree that's going up in here, like let's say I got rid of that house and it was right here. The way you draw a tree is you think of a sphere cut in half because you think of a canopy, right? So if I were to sketch it over here, I'm going to think of my trees being like this. And all trees have a root system and they have branches that connect up. And then I can see under that canopy, I can see underneath that because of the position of where the horizon line is. So if I come in here and I start to sketch a tree, I'm always going to figure out in there somewhere where I'm looking, underneath part of those details. So I can see under the canopy here, and then that's the top. I can see under the canopy here. And then I can make the branches go in, different patterns or whatever. I can erase any of those little lines here. So everything exists in shape. So that's how I start to rough in my tree that might be here in the foreground. I'm looking up, I can see underneath the tree, I'll be able to see where the branches are going. In that same context then, if I look up here and if I have a cloud in the sky, I can see under that cloud. And then if that cloud recedes, now this one's still closer to me, but then if I draw a cloud back here, it's going to be that scale of that cloud. If I were to measure from here to here and transfer that scale, that cloud's going to be a lot smaller, right? So I want my grid planes to make sense even in perspective, because what I don't want to do, how you flatten out a drawing, is when you come in here and you go. You put the same freaking cloud that's here, that's there. You don't want to do that, because it flattens them out. There's no depth or scale happening. Scale happens if you go outside and watch clouds move and look at how they go away. Anyone know what the 4 different types of clouds are? There's mainly 3 that we see here. Cumulonimbus, what? Cirrus, and stratus. Cirrus are like, don't even really count to me because they're like really stretched out thin and they're really hard to see. And cumulonimbus are like the big puffy clouds. And then the stratus are the ones that are sort of like stretched out a little bit, but they're long. So you can draw anything that you like. I have a personal fascination for the big puffy clouds. Sometimes I like to draw them winding like this, where I can still see underneath them. Like that. Winding back in perspective. You don't have to do that. You do whatever you like. But I'm just giving you that information about the grid plane. There is a grid plane that exists up above that. So think about elements that could be there. What would those elements be? I made a comment about a tree. There's a tree overhanging in the foreground. If I was doing a jungle scene, I could have lots of trees or other branches. I could have clouds. I could have birds. There's lots of little details. Now, we're not doing jungle scenes. We're just drawing the exterior of like a factory and a warehouse. So you need to think about what else you might have. Something else that's common, though, because I've seen students do this, is they'll come in the foreground sometimes, and they'll put an element like this, which is totally acceptable. Like that. And then they'll come back here and they'll be like, yeah, I'm bad. You know, and they'll draw little telephone wires. That would exist. We're looking up, it's going above the horizon line. You just got to find out the scale, and you can have telephone wires. Something else you might see in a shot like this would be street signs or light posts. Okay? It's funny because students will draw like a whole block and factories and everything with a neighborhood in it, and I go look and there's not one street light in the whole entire place.
Dark place.
So it'd be a really dark place, right? There's street lights all over the place and signs usually. Okay, so that gives you a rough breakdown. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recorder. Any other questions about this? Where to start? I've been talking for quite a bit. Let me stop Camtasia really quick here.